Peter the fisherman. A fisherman knows when a storm is pretty dangerous, and he was in the storm with the rest of them. He said, "Master, don't you care that I perish?" Well, there were two things wrong with that. Number one, he did care, and number two, they weren't perishing. But how many men have dropped out of their marriage situation because they couldn't see an answer? They would say, "My marriage is perishing. Lord, don't you care?" But they don't wait for the master of the storm to stand and say, "Peace." And the same God who I was reading a minute ago, and Bill, you reminded me of this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then it says, "And God spoke, and it was so, and it was good." And there are times in our lives as men, whether it's in our personal life or our family, our marriage, or in the workplace, where it seems like it's all without form and void and darkness. But when God is about to do something, the Spirit of God hovers over that life. And one word from God, and the Spirit of God brings it into being. Now, Jesus knew that. And I think that's what he was trying to tell the disciples. That it doesn't matter what the situation looks like. I'm going to try and shape your life so that you understand what my Father's like, what the Spirit is like, what I'm like. But he had to take them through some tough situations. And all the way through the training of the disciples, it seems like the Lord let them go into crisis moments. And then he wanted them to know what he was like. So he then acted. I was thinking, as we were thinking about this session, what's not in our book, but that event from John chapter 11. You might want to turn to that, because it's the one where a crisis occurred and Lazarus was sick and was dying. Now think about your life. Is something dying? See, this is how I look at the scripture when God is going to do something to me. All appearances look one way, but it's plus God. And they had to know what the plus God meant. Now, when God shapes the man he's going to use, he's going to try and help them to know what the plus God is like. And so here, Mary and Martha said, "Lord, if you'd been here, our brother would not have died." But in the 14th verse, look at the difference that God made by letting them go through the death of a friend. Then Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sake that I was not there, that you may believe." Isn't that a beautiful statement? That's the potter shaping the clay. There was a dimension in the finished product that was still missing. And so he had to let them go through a crisis situation. And then the hand of the potter delayed the healing process so the disciples could come to a whole new understanding. And you remember what it was they learned. In no other way could they have learned that he was the resurrection and the life. How important was that? These men were all going to face death. And they would never have been faithful had they not seen their Lord revealing himself as the resurrection and the life. So Paul could say, it doesn't matter to me whether, life or death. It doesn't matter. I know that he is the resurrection and the life. And he learned that from the disciples who walked with the Lord. So I think the question that many, many men face is, what about the shaping process? How does God shape the man God uses? And there's 3 or 4 things that I see in the scripture. One is that he chooses us. You remember Jeremiah, he said, "I chose you from before the foundation of the world." Or Ephesians chapter 1, he says, "You were chosen before the world." But the one he chooses, he then calls. In a specific time, he reaches out, like Peter, went to the boat and said, "Peter, follow me." But that was only the beginning. And I think we as men need to understand that being saved is not God's primary concern. His primary concern is what happens after you're saved. Because he's going to then shape you and mold you to become a channel through which he touches the rest of the world. And so once he chose Peter, then called him, then he took 3.5 years to shape him. He did it with the others, but he shaped him to be exactly the instrument that he was looking for. And he took him down the crucibles of life, which were pretty tough on Peter. Because most of how he taught Peter was not in the fishing trade. You would say, well, he's going to teach Peter through fishing. The call came, let down your nets. But after that, he took him out of the fish trade and began to shape his life so he could see the difference between the way the world functions and the way the kingdom functions. Now, Tom, you had a question.
Yeah, I had a question. A lot of people function by what I call an open door policy. If the door is open, they walk through it. If it's closed, well, then God must not think that it's what they should do. How do you know if God's opening a door, or if Satan's opening a door, or if it's just coincidence? Is there a way that you can tell whether God's truly speaking to you or leading you?
Well, first of all, it's not activity that God's looking for. It's character. And I would say most people are looking for a door to do something for God. But the doors that God opens are the ones that develop character. Now, Satan can create open doors. The temptations that he gave Jesus in the wilderness were open doors. Do you want me to show you how to be successful if you just take this to open? Was that an open door? Well, it was in the eyes of the world, but not for Jesus. Because an open door was not the way he looked at it. He said, I didn't come to do my will, but the will of him that sent me. So just an open door would not be sufficient. But if that open door leads to character, that is, if God's going to test your character, and you can see in that you're going to be far more the person that you were before, and it's not just an activity. I have never followed an open door just for activity. I've followed an open door because it was developing more of me than I've ever been before.
It seems like each open door causes greater dependence upon God.
Yes, that's character.
Rather than greater success?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Open door is not for success, but open door is for knowing him and being like him. Well, this is a huge topic, and I know we're going to follow it. And we're going to work it out so each of us knows clearly in our discussion how to know when God is shaping.